Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Gaya ng nakagawian ko konting paglalagom sa tatlong pagbasa, nagtutugma, nakakahugpong at mayroong tinutumbok na mahalagang mga larawan na pwede nating kapulutan ng pagninilay at ibabahagi sa buhay natin. In the first reading from Genesis, the keyword is look. Look up. It's not look down. Abram was told to look up to the stars of the sky. And then when he looked up, that was when the great declaration of the I am statement of God came. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans. I will come back to this, but please remember the word look. The second is the letter of Paul to the Philippians. He didn't use this word, but he meant this. Check on your attitude with regards to the human body. What do you mean by check? There are those who despise the body. They don't take care of it. They wallow in alcohol, in drugs. Pati yung youngest ng isang famous Pinoy na nasa Netherlands ngayon, wake and bake. Hindi ko naintindihan yan at ngayon ko lamang naintindihan wake and bake ay may kinalaman pala sa cannabis, sa drugs. When you use drugs, when you drown yourself in alcohol and you don't care of your body, you despise your body. That is not what St. Paul was talking about. But there are those who worship their bodies. They spend hundreds of thousands to fix their nose and go to the plastic surgery capital now of the world, and that is South Korea. And the next is Thailand. And the Philippines was a wannabe just a few years ago. Medical tourism, that was one of the plans of these China-backed businesses. So despise, worship. But then what St. Paul was really talking about was respecting the body. Why? Because the body is called to glory. When you look up, the other big word for it is transcendence. You're not happy with what you see down here below. You want more. You want the true, the noble, the good, the beautiful, the upright, the virtuous, what is worthy of praise. You cannot remain forever fighting over who should be in Malacanang. We need to look up to the Lord. Despising the body is not a Christian attitude. Worshipping the body, that is what St. Paul was talking about. Their God is their stomach. Pagka puro pagkain na lamang ang ating inaatupag, then we worship our body and we don't respect our body. The gospel is the clincher. The gospel tells us what our transcendent dreams focus on, and that is transfiguration and transformation in Christ. Christ has shown us the way by being transfigured, by becoming a glorified body, that the resurrected body we hope to have at some time in the future. We don't know when that is, but when we die and during the final judgment, there will be not only the resurrection from the dead of all those who have died, but all those whom the Lord said, stay at my right, and those of you stay at my left. Those who stay at the right, they will have a glorified body. Theologians don't know what this is all about. We cannot describe it. We can only dream about it, but we believe it even if we don't see it with our own eyes. We are hoping to be glorified like Christ was, and He showed us the example of this. But now, from based on the three readings, we need to look at what lessons they can teach us for today. I have three words for you. Number one is what I just said, look. That's from the first reading. Second is what I just said too, check. Check your vision on the body. And number three is see. Why see? And I'll explain why. First, let's deal with look. Look up. You have to recognize God and His intervention in your life, in our lives. When we don't look up, what do we see? We see all corruption, and we're getting more and more of it by the day. We see honorable people who are just actors who have nothing better to do except to do public service. When we don't look up, then what do we see? We see only politics with a small letter P, and not politics with a big letter P that calls for the common good. Hindi lang ng mga family dynasties at ng inyong pinapanginoon at inyong fanatical lords. We need to look up, and when we look up, what do we see? When you look up at the altar, what do you see? When you go to church, what do you see? Do you recognize God, His presence, and His action in your life? Number two is check on your vision about your body, the window to the soul. Check on your sources of information. Check on your echo chambers, what you listen to, the algorithm of the social media that you follow, with all sorts of false narratives and fake news. It is no secret that the two big countries in the world mastered the art of manipulation. They call it brainwashing 50 years ago. But now psychologists are not talking about it in terms of brainwashing. It is mind control tactics. And mind control tactics understood in media has to do with false narratives and the big art of propaganda. It is no secret that Russia has become the number one example and propagator of false propaganda. So the guy in Washington, D.C. buys it hook, line, and sinker. So Putin is a good guy. Putin, who has killed hundreds of thousands of his own people, never worries about the bodies of the dead and the living. He is a good guy, according to the guy in Washington, D.C. Check on your body, check on the window to the soul, check on your eyesight, check on your vision, check on your sources of information, check on whether you despise your body, you worship it, or you respect it. And then the third, I'd like us to think about this. See more, not less. When you look up to the Lord, you see more, not less. And the lesson of the third reading today tells us, how do we see more, not less? You don't look down. You don't go to any material entity. You don't go to your neighbor and ask for the latest marites at latest chismes. Chismear in Spanish is to gossip. Chismes is Spanish, not Tagalog. You do need to look up. Look up where? To the heavens. Look up to the stars in the sky and see and recognize the God of the covenant. And when Abraham looked at in the darkness of the night, that was when the Lord talked about the covenant between him and his people. And in the time of Moses, the people out in the dark desert, in the dreary desert, says, "You will be our God, and we will be your people." You need to look up. You need to set your sights on what is above, not on what is below. And then number 2 lesson, by seeing more, not less, you need to check on your body, the window. You need to check on your blinders. You need to check on what is your attitude. You despise the body. You need to know where you are. There are people who say, I had a former student who was high up in the Philippine National Police, and one of my talks to my former students at one time a few years ago was that corruption is getting worse and worse by the day, by the month, by the year. And he told me, Father, you're a priest. You know that the solution is only prayer, pietism. Hello, Colonel, you need to help God a little bit. You need to work on the state of corruption in the area that is your expertise. If you are one of them, you don't help God. And no matter how many dozens of rosaries you say, that's pietism. And then there's Conrado Balweg, who said that the solution is to take up guns and fight those who are unchangeable. That's activism. And the two are extremes. I don't call you to pietism. Those who pray only kilometrical rosaries a day, but they don't lift a finger, and they park everywhere. And they have 3 cars and only one paradahan, and they park it in front of the gate of the fellow, their neighbor who doesn't have a car. That's pietism. I don't ask you to take up arms and go to Menjola and rebel. That's activism. And the middle ground has to do with ordinary people who just look up to the Lord and call on Him, but they go home to do what they can, to clean their yard, and not to throw their trash outside the streets. Like people who bring dogs, they make them poop anywhere. Last week, somebody brought the dog right in front of my door, and they allow the dog to poop anywhere. No amount of rosaries will make it any better. You need to clean up after your dog. You need to check on your blinders. What do you worship? St. Paul was talking about their God is their belly. This is materialism. This is secularism. When we rely on the horizontal and not on the vertical, you don't look up. You look sideways. Mas mayaman siya. You look at your left. Saan kaya niya kinuha yung pera? You look down and say, there is too much corruption in this country. You need to look up. And when you look up, you recognize God and His will for you. And maybe He will tell you, you need to think about the covenant you signed up when you were baptized. You need to think about what you did last Christmas. You attended simbang gabi, nabuo mo yung 9 na gabi. Pero wala ka nung first Sunday of Lent. Wala ka last Sunday. You need to think about what blinders you're using. And then, do you respect your body? The body that is the temple of the Holy Spirit? Do you recognize that as human beings, we are a composite being made of body and soul? And therefore, we need to worry not only about what food to eat, but what to feed the soul. And therefore, when you look up and you see the tabernaculum, the tabernacle, in Latin it means tent, the tabernacle where the sacred body and blood of the Lord is, the real presence of God in His divinity and humanity. When you look up and see the tabernaculum, the tent of the covenant, the tent of meeting, then you realize you need to do something about your political affiliation. And you need to do and deal with politics with a capital letter P. And then the last thing that is the lesson, because I only have 10 few precious responsible minutes that I have overshot. I forgot my watch, so I'm looking at the watch behind me or behind you. The next one is put on your telescopes. And what do I mean by putting on your telescopes? To see beyond, to look up, to look beyond the bread you eat, look beyond the prayers that you say, look beyond what you do in church on Sundays. Put on your telescopes. And what am I referring to? Jesus went up to the mountain. Going up the mountain means facing the mountains of pain, tragedy, depression, discouragement, facing the pain of illnesses, the pain of being human, but also facing the possibility of being glorified like Christ. But you need to go up the mountain. And second, what do you do on the mountain? The Gospel of Luke tells us Jesus went up the mountain to pray, not to do an excursion, to pray. And Luke tells us further on, while he was praying, his face was changed in appearance, and his clothing became dazzling white. But then, what did Peter, James, and John saw? Luke says, they saw his glory. And that closes the chapter for you and me. When you come to church, what do you see? You see your enemy who is your neighbor. You see your least favorite priest, the one you don't like. Or you see your favorite clergyman. Or you see other people who are wearing better clothes than you. What do you see? Peter, James, and John, because they looked up to the Lord, they saw His glory. And that is all we need to see. Look, check, and see. What do you see today?